Hello, everyone. Hello, hello. Thank you for joining. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Good to see you all. Thank you for joining. Um, Welcome back to our series on Othello for A-level students. This is one of actually our 13th stream, completely free for everyone studying A-level Othello. Regardless of exam boards, this will help you. So today we are going to be looking at the theme of appearance versus reality, which in a way is two themes really, and in a way as well links so many of the different ideas that we have about prejudice and race, identity, manipulation, deceit, betrayal, friendship, marriage, all of these different ideas then come really to ground in this idea of appearance versus reality, because of course we have both sides of it in this theme. We have the appearance and everything that comes together with appearance, as well as this idea of reality. We have the reality of the experience as contrasting to the appearance of things. So all of those ideas of deceit, of monstrosity, of manipulation really come into tension in this theme here. But there is so much, as you will see, that we can borrow from other themes, which is really true across all of the themes. So sometimes people panic and they think, oh, what would happen if I got something like friendship or fear, both of which have come up relatively recently in the Edexcel exam board. And really the answer is the same, because it really just depends, okay, well, the information we have about the play itself is limited, right? We only have what we've got in the play. We don't have to come up with a completely new idea. We just need to think about, for example, fear of what? Fear of Black people, fear of miscegenation, fear of monstrosity, fear of betrayal, all those ideas manipulating into this specific essay format. Same with friendship. Friendship between Iago and Othello, friendship between Othello and the Venetians, friendship between him and Cassio. It all plots out, and we can also think about the consequences of all of those different ideas, right? So like fear or male friendship, appearance versus reality covers quite a lot of grounds for us. If you're joining us for the first time, there is a workbook that you can download in the description of this video so that you'll be able to follow along, make annotations, jot down notes, and leave with a really nice set of notes completely designed by me for you for free as part of the My Edspace free stream and English experience. Sarafu, hello. It's your first day. It's been difficult to get your course portal. Okay, so if you're talking about My Edspace's course portal, then you will need to reach out to the customer service line, and that information should be in the description of this video, of this live stream, so that you'll be able to reach out to them. Okay, so I don't have access to all of your course detail information, but someone is currently waiting to help you with that if you reach out to their customer service representative. Okay. All right. So let's get into this theme then. In case you are joining new, as I know Sarafu is, I'm Eleanor. I'm one of the English teachers at My Edspace. I've been teaching A level for 6 years. And just a little bit about my degree. You don't need to know that to know about Othello. So let's get started with that. And rather than start with some review questions, today let's take a look at a quotation that really grounds our understanding of Othello here in this play. This is I know not what I am. And this comes from Iago here. However, it carries quite a lot of weight. Firstly, this idea of him saying and admitting that he is not as he appears. Or not as he seems. So immediately, we have this idea of Rahul, I'm afraid all of our lessons are online, so it's just online information. So immediately, we have this idea of Iago admitting to us that he is not who he thinks, who other people think he is, not who Othello thinks he is, and perhaps not what we think he is here. So there is an interesting tension immediately. An interesting tension immediately between seeming and being. And really, who is he lying to here when he says, I'm not what I am? Is he lying to Othello? Is he lying to the Venetians? Is he lying to the audience? Because we know that in Othello, Iago speaks the most of any character. In fact, he speaks in 43% of the first few acts. So he really owns this play. And as Harold Bloom says, he is the director of this play. So really he seems to be warning not only Othello, but also us about deceitfulness, about betrayal, about manipulation, and about this idea of mistrust or misplaced trust, really. Because it's interesting that it's called Othello when this really seems to be Iago's play, right? He is the one giving us this information. But also there is an even further tension with this when we think about the fact that why would he admit this to us? Is he, as we said, trying to warn us? Is he trying to further destabilize our understanding of reality? Or is he speaking to us in a way of making us complicit? Are we complicit here in knowing this about Iago, but because we're an audience, being unable to avoid watching the characters go through this? And on another and further level, we have this as an allusion to the Bible. So you can either say a biblical allusion, or you can say a reference to the Bible, religious imagery, whatever phrasing you'd like to use. And this comes from Exodus, when God is described as I am what I am. This also comes in the story of Moses, so this revelation of God in the Old Testament. It's also Paul in the New Testament in a letter to I believe it's the Corinthians, saying, by the grace of God, I am what I am. So this idea then of this being a common idea in the Bible, and also a translation of one of God's sacred names. He's called the Great I Am here. So for Iago to say this, we really have him as admitting and aligning and subverting this biblical illusion and essentially associating himself with the devil here. By changing this, saying, not I am what I am, God being truth and trust and all good, he is essentially subverting, perhaps corrupting this phrase in order to align himself with the devil, who is a figure in the Bible who dwells in deceit, who deals in manipulation and disguise, right? This is at really the beginning of the play. And then Iago's final presentation in Act 5, Scene 2, he says, what you know, you know. This is in response to Othello saying to Cassio, can you tell me why this demi-devil thus ensnared me? So can you get Iago to explain why he's done this to me? And he essentially says, I'm not talking anymore. What you know, you know. So really here, he doesn't even give us the cop-out of explaining himself here. It doesn't give us the justice. There's no justice here. There's no catharsis. Because he seemingly doesn't have grounds for revenge. And it seems as though that makes him more villainous, right? That makes him more villainous because he is just seemingly doing this in order to be destructive and miserable and to engender chaos, much the way that the biblical Satan, biblical Lucifer does, wanting just to gain power and cause chaos. But also, it's such a disruptive thing to say at this point in the play because we are seeking that catharsis, we're seeking resolution. And Iago's final villainy is that he does not give it to us. He denies us that. He says, what you know, you know. What does he mean by this? Does he mean you know the reasons why I got revenge and ensnared you? Because either you know you slept with Amelia, or because you know that you wronged me by passing me over for the promotion, or you know this because you know I hate you secretly? Possibly. Could he also be speaking to us, the audience, and saying, you know my reasons, you've heard me here, you're complicit as well, you're doomed to silence as the audience, you can't partake in this play, I am also now not revealing any further information to you, so you are forced to contend with this on your own. Or in another way, is he pointing to the deep-seated prejudice and perhaps villainy within all of us? It's hard to say because it seems like Iago sees us much more than any of the other characters do. Indeed, Othello in particular, as Iago himself says, sees people for what they seem to be and doesn't question it. Whereas Iago seemingly sees the worst version, of course, of people, but seems to read them rightly. So perhaps he is saying here, in some ways, a way to justify himself. He doesn't have to justify himself because this and he is a product of his society. So even in the final moments of the play, knowledge, truth, reality is obscured to us. Now, what can this look like in an exam question? It could look something like this. Explore how Shakespeare presents the conflict between appearance and reality in Othello. Use your knowledge of contextual factors and criticism in your answer. That's a very common second line in an exam question, is that you're saying include context. So, for example, Jacobean views about appearance and reality, as well as criticism about who sees reality. So I'm already being inspired from the lesson on jealousy. All of these ideas I'm thinking about, for example, of the green-eyed monster, and all of those descriptions of an influence, a veil, or some kind of mist or darkness obscuring sight. And Iago, as someone who constructs these scenes and thus creates his own version of reality, which we of course know is very different from the real reality. So let's brainstorm this a little bit. And I would love to see some ideas in the chat from everyone in the chat. How is appearance different from reality in the play? Or any different ideas that you have about appearance and reality in the play. So for example, I'm thinking, as I said, about this green-eyed monster. So influences like jealousy affect sight. I'm also thinking of Iago as one of the reasons this happens, right? Iago misguides Othello, makes him see something that is not true, makes him, in other words, question what is true. We also have the key image in this play, which is the ocular proof. The handkerchief here. That centers the plot as the ocular proof, the eye proof or eyewitness of the play, of Desdemona's adultery. We also have Othello and his supposed sight being disrupted. We have, though we've looked at it previously in a lens of, for example, race, we have light and dark as a motif across the play. This idea of things being obscured and things being revealed. We have these mini scenes and Iago being a director. We have Othello and his view of Desdemona. because a lot of that light imagery is linked to Desdemona. And he also seemingly can't believe that someone who looks like her could possibly be deceitful. So there we tie in ideas, for example, of physiognomy. And physiognomy being the phrenology, as well as a related pseudoscience, so fake science, of people's moral character being reflected in their external appearance. So if people are good and holy and pure, then they're beautiful, and not the other way around. So if someone's evil, then it's easy to see. If they're corrupt in some way, then they should be easy to see. So then Iago is a master at deception then as well, because everyone else seems to view him as honest. And we also, as we've said in the past, have these ideas of dirt and corruption, right? That's linked to this idea of light and dark in the play, but also, for example, let me write that. Of Brabantio describing Othello as, or Desdemona as having run from her garden to the city bosom of such a thing as thou. This idea of contamination. And corruption. Thinking, for example, of the lust-stained bed sheets, the marital sheets. So then as well, we have this idea of whiteness linked with that as well in the play, sort of back to white and darkness and light and darkness, etc. This is a pretty good start. We certainly as well have ideas like the marriage between Othello and Desdemona being one of love versus lust. What does it seem like to the Venetians, for example? Even Othello, what does Othello seem like to the Venetians here? Because to the Venetians, he's this old black ram. He is an enchanter. He's committing witchcraft. He's stealing away the daughter, etc. But also we have him as this genteel, noble hero, and him being someone whose appearance is different than their reality. For example, the Duke says he's more fair than black, essentially, if he's looking at his character. There's a lot of play here with appearance versus reality. Let's take a look at some ideas then. So firstly, with this idea of how does it differ from reality? And let's take a look at some quotations that will give us a clearer idea of this. Okay? So Iago says, the Moor is of a free and open nature that thinks men honest, but seem to be so, and will be as tenderly be led by the nose as asses are. Okay, so firstly, we have Iago revealing himself, because he views this free and open nature as something easily manipulated and as too trusting. Thus, in his mind, being too trusting is something bad, because it's something that can be corrupted and is corruptible. So we know that Othello is those things, and we know that Iago clearly is not. We also know that in Iago's mind, Othello thinks men honest that but seem to be so. So he's saying, Othello is too trusting because he trusts people that seem to be honest, not because they are honest. Okay, so this perhaps reveals Othello as a character who's too trusting, right? Because he is unable to see the difference between appearance and reality there. And as such, he will be, in this simile here, as tenderly led by the nose as asses are. So he is saying then that he will be able to be deceived and manipulated as easily as a donkey being led by the reins forward. So there's absolutely zoomorphism there, as there is across the play in Iago's language, because Iago views Othello as this kind of animalistic brute who is too unevolved to see the difference between the two, to see the deception. Other people would think that's a good thing, right? That someone's trusting and open and not relying on prejudice. Iago, the villain, views that as a detriment to Othello. And this is interesting as well, that Othello, in Iago's own words, is revealed as someone who does not base his opinions on prejudice, especially as it is Othello who is judged with prejudice for his race, etc., chiefly his race. Yeah. And so Iago's whole plan is formed on his knowledge of Othello, but also the fact that he knows that someone who is trusting can be easily manipulated, and that he can be led as an animal into believing whatever Iago tells him because Othello trusts Iago. So there we have this whole plan is dependent on Iago's ability to deceive Othello because he's too trustworthy, because Othello, perhaps to his detriment, perhaps this is his fatal flaw, he cannot distinguish between reality and appearance. Iago also says, when my outward action doth demonstrate the native act and figure of my heart in complement extern, 'tis not long after, but I will wear my heart upon my sleeve for doors to peck at. I am not what I am. So this gives you slightly more context for this. I am not what I am. But he is saying here that his outward actions and his heart, when it becomes obvious through his actions what his heart feels, then it's to the point that he will wear his heart on his sleeve for doors to peck at, for crows to peck at. In other words, not being deceitful, being too openly honest, is something that makes you vulnerable for a predator, a door, like Iago, to peck at, to take advantage of, to consume. So really here it's ironic because we're seeing this idea of this not being Iago at all. Perhaps slightly more to us, he speaks honestly, but even then, we really have to be aware of the fact that he could be deceiving us as well, right? This is part of his scheme. Many critics have linked this idea of he brings us into his spell as well. So that is interesting there. And interesting that he says it. Iago also says, knavery's plain face is never seen till used. So he says, knavery, so sort of the wrongness that people are up to, bad behavior, is never made clear until it's already happened. So then this idea of a plain face is never seen, which is true with Iago. His villainy is not revealed until after he's done what he set out to do. It's not revealed that he's the villain until after Desdemona is dead, and even if Othello does not commit suicide, he's already been completely destroyed mentally, reputation-wise, socially, maritally, friendship-wise, etc. And also, he would likely be killed for killing Desdemona as well. So again, it's very ironic. There is so much irony in the way that Iago's language is presented. Perhaps because he seems just cleverer than everyone around him. And he knows this. And he's arrogant enough to say these things aloud, realizing that the other characters will not pick him up on it because he's honest Iago. But this as well is, remember, the warning about Cassio and Desdemona. So this is Iago telling Othello that when Othello can't believe that Desdemona and Cassio could do this because their face doesn't betray their actions, and because, for example, Desdemona's beauty is still intact, this goodly book upon which the word whore is written, she can't see it. It's the idea that he's saying, well, you can't trust this, so get over yourself, it did happen, act on it. A different scene, Iago says, for Michael Cassio, I dare be sworn, I think that he is honest. I think so too. Men should be what they seem, or those that be not, would that they might seem none. Certainly, men should be what they seem. Well, then I think Cassio is an honest man. Such a clever piece of language here, because he, through the qualifiers in his language, so through the I think, I dare be sworn that he is honest. He could just say he's honest. But that's different from the doubt that Iago intentionally sows into his language here in order to disrupt Othello's view of Cassio and Desdemona and view of reality. Because he says, I think, and he is allowing Othello to hang himself here by saying, by leading him into his own trap, by sowing these doubts in his mind. We've argued in previous lessons, is Iago putting this doubt and fear into Othello, or just bringing it out of him where it already was entrenched somewhere within Othello? We don't know. We have to argue that ourselves. But we can see that Othello starts to take this language on too. I think so too. That men should be what they seem. We know that Iago thinks that Othello is this, and we know that Iago thinks that Othello thinks this. Or those that be not, would that they might seem none. So this idea that if they are not what they seem, I wish they didn't seem like they were. So again, very complex, tricky language here, intentionally to obfuscate his meaning. That means intentionally to cloud his meaning here in order to sow these doubts in. So literally, he is clouding the reality here through language, through a basketry language, you could say. Certain men should be what they seem. Again, Othello is taking and reflecting the language of Iago. So very much like the motif of poison, we can see here. Othello's language becomes more like Iago's language because of his influence on him. And then Iago, why then? So if you believe that, then I think Cassio is honest, because the implication is because he seems honest, not because he is. And this is really snap the mousetrap here for Othello, and he is then caught in this idea, ensnared in this idea, to use his language, of Cassio potentially not being honest because he's not as he seems. So really rooted in doubt here. Othello also says, if she be false, if, again, we have this sense of doubtful, uncertain language with Othello that he gets from Iago. Heaven mocked itself, I'll not believe it. So this idea that heaven is playing, it's making fun of itself. If it gave Desdemona such beauty, but it's actually concealing something evil underneath it. So it's a mockery of good if she is just like deceitful. And this is what he bases his proof on, is on appearance. He doesn't really ask her very well if she's honest, and seemingly doesn't believe her when she says it. He's looking at her face and saying, why can't I see if you're honest or not? Which shows how much Othello relies on appearance as well. For a character who is judged so much on prejudice for his appearance, he does this as well. So he's a flawed, tragic character, I would say. Othello also says, villain, be sure thou prove my love afore, be sure of it. Give me the ocular proof. Make me to see it, or at the least, so prove it. So again, make me see it, give me the proof that I can see. Or, at the least, so prove it that the probation bear no hinge or loop to hang a doubt on, or woe upon my leg. So essentially, make me see it, or if you can't, make it without a doubt. Immediately then, he's disrupting his own requirement for proving Desdemona innocent or guilty here. Because he's saying, give me proof that I can see. And if not, just make the proof really good proof. Appreciate Asadilla. Thank you for your comment. That's very kind. Then, interestingly as well, this is Iago now talking to Rodrigo, saying her eye must be fed. So then we have the idea of her eye, sight, understanding, knowledge, clarity, wisdom, reality, truth. Her eye must be fed. So here is a real crux of Iago for us in saying that the appearance, this must appear to her as something good. He's talking about Rodrigo coming in to supplement for Othello as Desdemona's love interest, because she will not be interested in Othello for long because he's black, essentially. And he says her eye must be fed. So this really does speak to this idea that one, in Iago's view, needs to be reinforced in their perception of things. And this idea of being fed, we've spoken about a theme of consumption before in the play. And Desdemona, in particular, as an object for the men around her to consume, and sex as this idea of consumption within the play that highlights the power dynamic, particularly between men and women in the play, but also speaks to Iago's influence on Othello as something that consumes him, and his jealousy consumes him. So there's these ideas of consumption that take over someone. But here the perception changes a little bit, because here he's speaking about the fact that reality for Iago can be constructed. It just needs to seem that way for her to be happy. And again, perhaps the most famous quotation in the play, "Oh, beware, my lord, of jealousy. It is the green-eyed monster that doth mock the meat it feeds upon." So again, we have consumption, but we also have the green-eyed monster. So jealousy is a monster that preys on you and laughs at you while it eats you. So humiliation there as well as destruction. But we also have this idea of it being green-eyed. Firstly, with green, we have this idea of a tint to your eyes, right? So if you're having a screen in front of you, or a tinted glasses, it changes your understanding and your view of the world. That is on purpose, right? That he is saying this, because we have jealousy then as something that distorts your perception of the truth, distorts your sight, distorts your reality and what you're looking at. With that as well, we also have this idea with green and its connotations of disease here. So although we today think of it more as something about nature, perhaps recycling, something positive, here in a Jacobean context, it would be something diseased and something sick. So this idea then of something that is a diseased sight of reality, then, that it corrupts one's vision here. With this as well. Othello says, this honest creature doubtless sees and knows much more than he unfolds. This is him talking about, of course, Iago. And he's saying, in an aside, after Iago's left, that he is clearly seeing and knowing more about this affair than he is telling. Two things here. Firstly, proof that Othello cannot see reality in this moment, right? Because he only sees the version of reality that Iago feeds him. But it's also this idea that he is able to give Othello the impression that he is actually hiding more about this affair out of courtesy, perhaps, to Othello. And this immediately, again, shakes Othello's understanding of the truth. But also, it's ironic, because here Othello unknowingly speaks truth about Iago. Iago does see and know much more than he says to Othello. But Othello doesn't see it in the way that, of course, we do, which is that this is all fake. This is all something he's constructing in order to hurt you. And Iago again says, when devils with their blackest sins put on, they do suggest at first with heavenly shows as I do now. So firstly, color imagery here and religious imagery. And this means devil's darkest sins are first hidden by the most perfect, pure view. So the most corruptive, evil villains mask themselves as angels and heroes. This, in a nutshell, is Iago. He's honest Iago, who is actually a devil hiding here. And there are so many layers to the deception here, because there's so many layers to what Iago reveals, to whom, at what time, and what of that is true. And Porter, these are our critics above me, and Porter says, Iago's speech is characterized by the use of imperatives, explicit performatives, and asides. So explicit performatives being, he's saying, I think that Cassio is honest and really hitting that think, imagine, in performance, because he's insowing doubt in that qualifier on purpose. And aside, so speaking to us, not hearing all the characters. As such, Iago becomes an agent in the play, directing others to do as he say or bids. Porter calls him a director of the action. So many critics have called him a director of such, because he is literally creating the reality for each specific character. Acidola, like a politician, mostly corrupted, acts like an angel, exactly right. Appearance, reality, completely divorced. Ryan says, it seems very simply that Shakespeare was imagining a cat, known for its giant green eyes, delighting in mocking its victim, meat, before devouring it. This is for the green-eyed monster. What a vivid picture this interpretation gives us of jealousy, tormenting the mind of the jealous man with a barrage of suspicions before it consumes him completely. So this idea then of a cat torturing its victim. So it's such an intense metaphor here, and perhaps the central metaphor of the play, because it is this idea of toying with reality, this bigger character, literally like someone with a marionette here, defining reality forever. Neil says the habit of obsessive speculation about concealed offstage action into which the play entraps its viewer as it entraps its characters. Othello persistently goads its audience into speculation about what is happening behind the scenes. So here is this idea, starting as we did with I am not what I am, this idea that we as an audience are unsatisfied because there is constantly references to offstage action, most notably in Neil's essay, this idea of Desdemona and Othello's consummation of their marriage, but also this idea that we actually don't know everything about Iago. What he gives us is only what he decides to give us. So we don't know what he is up to offstage or what he actually thinks. That destabilizes us further. Then, with Othello, does he see reality? And you could absolutely argue either side here. It's up to you. Or you could say that he starts seeing it, and then as the play carries on, this starts to change. And it's important to think about with Iago and Othello here, that this play encapsulates a very common theme, as we looked at in lessons 2 and 3 of this scheme of lessons, that this is a kind of double betrayal. The worst kind, a very common version of Shakespearean tragedy, is this double betrayal of a man being betrayed by the woman he loves with the man he loves. So this idea of his entire reality being completely destabilized, and this idea of him being unable to trust what is happening around him from previously extremely trustable sources. And this idea of a character who is lost in their suspicions without knowing where to turn or who to believe is a really common thread in Shakespearean tragedies. For example, see Hamlet, see King Lear, see Julius Caesar, see Macbeth. So let's take a look at Othello's version of this. In this first scene here, that carries on into the second part of this chunk here as well. So this is all one scene here. Alas, what ignorant sin have I committed? Was it this fair paper, this most goodly book, made to write whore upon? What committed? Committed! O thou public commoner, I should make very forges of my cheeks, that would to cinders burn up modesty, did I but speak thy deeds. What committed? Heaven stops the nose at it, and the moon winks. The bawdy wind that kisses all it meets is hushed within the hollow mine of earth, and will not hear it. What committed? Impudent strumpet. Turn thy complexion there, patience, thou young and rose-lipped cherubin, I there look grim as hell. I hope my noble lord esteems me honest. O I, as summer flies are in the shambles, that quicken even with blowing. O thou weed, that art so lovely fair, and smellest so sweet, that the sense aches at thee, would thou hadst ne'er been born. By heaven, you do me wrong. Are you not a strumpet? No, as I am a Christian. If to preserve this vessel from my lord, from any other foul unlawful touch, be not to be a strumpet, I am none. What, not a whore? So here then we have a couple of different ideas. Firstly, we have this idea of her ignorant sin. The fact that she says committed. Committed carries connotations of sin as well. In the language, committing a sin, for example. And we have this reflected across Othello's language, which already shows his disturbance in his language, disturbance in his mind, disturbance in his reality, because he's unable to carry on the sentence without this continuous repetition and fixation here. It's also interesting that he was this fair paper, this most goodly book, made to write whore upon. So he is describing Desdemona's face as a white piece of paper, or a goodly book, probably a prayer book. And he's saying, this page, your face, has been corrupted because it's been written the word whore on it. So essentially, your deeds, your soul, your face has been corrupted by this sin. It's written on your face what you've done. So again, he feels like he can see this in her face, and he is then disturbed at why she is still beautiful to him if she has this evil sin corrupting her. There is, of course, language of burning up, hellish imagery here, burning up to cinders, the forges of the cheek, and everything, heaven, the moon, so light, wind, all of this cannot bear to see Desdemona's deeds. And here as well, within the hollow mine of earth, so even hell won't hear of this. It's too bad of a sin. A little bit exaggerating, I would say. And impudent strumpet. Then we have language here. Strumpet, O thou weed, strumpet, whore, etc. And a couple of bits here. So he can only see her in this light now. He can't return to his previous vision of her as divine Desdemona. That's Cassio saying that, but it's her gentle Desdemona, that I do love her, etc. He can't see that version of her anymore. He can only see what he's been told. He is blinded by this view of her as a strumpet. So anything that she says or offers as proof against this is then further enraging him. He is not able to see a difference here. And he says this, turn thy complexion there. So he's essentially saying, like, let me see your face. We can imagine him doing something like this and saying, you look like an angel, but you ought to look grim as hell. You ought to look black and evil and dark like hell, because you've done something hellish. So again, the juxtaposition between the two, between the fair paper, the most goodly book, and the whore, strumpet, etc. And the same with the O weed that smells so sweet. He compares her to a weed that may be pretty, but is still a corruption to the garden, is an unwanted presence, is some kind of unnecessary influence here. So again, the deception of, well, you seem so lovely and look so lovely and you smell so sweet, but you are bad on the inside. You're something that's going to overpower me, that's going to take over, that's going to destroy my garden. And again, we can see Desdemona defending herself, perhaps in a slightly transgressive way, perhaps in a very passive way, depending on how you want to argue it. And she describes herself as a vessel that she preserves from any foul, unlawful touch. So she then is some kind of object that she keeps safe for him. Could she be talking about her soul, her body, specifically her reproductive body here? Definitely, depending on what you're talking about. And she's saying all of this is preserved for you. So how does that make me a strumpet? And again, he can't hear this because he says, what, not a whore? And we can see the kind of arrogant anger and frustration and rage behind that, because again, whatever she's saying is not something that he can see anymore. After a bad influence over him. Yeah, she definitely, like an Eve-like character, right? Eve to Adam being the corruptive one who caused Adam's downfall in that version. There. Vignac, thank you for joining us. Great, and Vidal, thank you. And this idea of Othello then, in that final part, what, not a whole question mark. Look how many question marks. He is questioning her and questioning reality, really. Questioning her appearance. He can't see through it. Iago also says to him later when he says, well, she looks innocent, so she must be, right? He says, her honour is an essence that's not seen. They have it very oft that have it not. But for the handkerchief, by heaven, I would most gladly have forgot it. Thou saidst, oh, it comes o'er my memory as doth the raven over the infectious house, boding to all. he has my handkerchief. So here Iago is saying her honor is something you can't see. Essentially, you can't prove that she is honorable by sight. And many people seem honest who are not. It's the handkerchief that will prove if she's honest or not. Of course, knowing that the handkerchief is the proof that he is going to plant in Cassio's room and thus bring Cassio and Desdemona. Interesting, that handkerchief being something that our attention, our vision is drawn to in the play as well, as something that is this riding this tentative line between appearance and reality. And it's interesting that Iago does this because he says handkerchief so many times in the play, bringing it up over and over again so that we focus on it and so that it becomes this ocular proof for us. And Othello thinks of the influence of this thinking as a raven over an infectious house. So a raven being a harbinger of death, an omen of death, a carrion bird, so a bird that eats dead things, over the infectious house, so over a plagued house. So in other words, his house, he is diseased. His brain is the infectious house that's been diseased. And the handkerchief is the raven that hearkens, that announces that this death is coming. So then we have this corruption of Iago's becomes a plague to Othello's brain that corrupts his view of reality. And it all hinges upon the handkerchief and the fact that Othello sees the handkerchief in Cassio's hat. And Desdemona says as well, "Yet I fear you, for you are fatal then when your eyes roll so. Yet why should I fear you? Why should I fear I know not? Since guiltiness I know not, but yet I feel fear. Think on thy sins. They are loves I bear to you. Aye, and for that thou diest." So here, Desdemona says, you're fatal and your eyes are rolling in your head. So really what that means is that he's completely crazed, right? He's not looking, he looks deranged or chaotic, completely out of control. But if we're thinking about what eyes rolling in someone's head means, it means that he can't see clearly. It is his rage, jealousy, frustration, anger, etc. that means that he cannot see her or the truth. And again, Desdemona can see that when you're like this, you're fatal, you're deadly. So it is this lack of sight that destroys the both of them, because Othello can't see Desdemona and can't see reality and thus can't see his own situation and is destroyed. He becomes fatal as a result of this. Greenblatt says that Othello's identity depends upon a constant performance of his story. So this idea then of Othello's character being this play within a play where he feels that appearance is very important. Remember, he's an outsider in society. So if he is made to seem foolish, is made to seem cuckolded, that will affect him more intensely than it will the other characters. And that the pressures on Othello perhaps lead him to believe that, like him, who is judged for something he is not, that other people contain this underlying layer through which they are able to subvert that first prejudiced view of themselves. Eliot says, endeavoring to escape reality, that should be escape, not escape. Endeavoring to escape reality, he sees to think about Desdemona as thinking about himself. So this idea that he can't see Desdemona, we've seen this quote before, he can't see Desdemona here. He can't see her as someone saying, well, I love you and I am honest and I'm a Christian and I wouldn't do this. I haven't done anything wrong. He can only see what he's been told and what he believes to be true. So it really does seem arrogant to a certain extent as well. As well, he views this, what he can see, as reason justifiable for his killing of her. And Neil, again, this obsessive idea of speculation. He can't see the truth and he can't see what he thinks he has seen. He's just speculating about what's happened. But that leads to serious consequences. Then we have the handkerchief. I think if we have a question about appearance versus reality, it would be worth doing a whole paragraph on the handkerchief itself. Because it is so rich in analysis here, not least for its black and white imagery around it, because obviously it's black, it's white, and it has strawberries on it. That famed virginity test of that would be Desdemona's blood from her consummating her marriage or not being a virgin anymore. But this idea of staining and dirtiness, Cassio wiping his mouth with it, this idea of staining with it, that speaks to the importance of it. Othello says, that handkerchief did an Egyptian to my mother give. She was a charmer and could almost read the thoughts of people. She told her, while she kept it, that it would make her amiable and subdue my father entirely to her love. But if she lost it or made gift of it, my father's eye should hold her loathed, and his spirit should hunt after new fancies. She, dying, gave it to me and bid me, when my fate would have me wived, to give it to her. I did so, and take heed on it, make it a darling like your precious eye. To lose it or give it away was such perdition as nothing else could match. Is it possible? 'Tis true, there is magic in the web of it. A Sibyl that had numbered in the world the sun to course 200 compasses, in her prophetic fury sewed the work. The worms were hallowed that did breathe the silk, and it was dyed in mummy, which the skilful conserved of maidens' hearts. So then, we have this idea of, firstly, it's magic, right? And it's magic will be linked to this Egyptian who could read people's thoughts. So then clearly Othello thinks of this handkerchief as perhaps imbued with this idea of being able to reveal reality then. And it would also be able to influence behavior. So it would be able to essentially control the husband, Othello's father, and be able to control his eye. So essentially to control his vision, control his reality, to control his behavior as well, right? Because here his eye is part of this description. And then make it a darling like your precious eye. So make it as dear to you as your own eye. Remember, this is not a time period in which someone would be able to recover an eye if it were damaged. It's this idea of it being incredibly important, not only to one's appearance, but also to their ability to live, right? Because it's your ability to see. So make it as important as your sight there as well. Again, this idea of eye here, watching, seeing, reality, etc. And then, as Othello says, there's magic in it. Desdemona, and this perhaps reveals her age and naivete. Is it possible that this has its magic powers to it? Hello, Neil, just crying over AQA. Nice to see you again. And this idea of in her prophetic fury, so the Sibyl, this kind of magical creature who was 200 years old, in her prophetic fury sewed the work. So as a prophecy, in other words, did this. So then perhaps links this idea to the handkerchiefs being prophetic here, revealing the future. We can see that with the trajectory that the handkerchief goes on in the play. And it was dyed in mummy, conserved of maiden's heart. So it's preserved the silk in maiden's heart blood in order to keep its magic in. And again, then this associates the handkerchief with virginity and thus links it to this idea of appearance versus reality, because we know that Desdemona is seemingly virginal throughout the play, and that does not reflect the handkerchief, because of course those ideas are different, but the handkerchief becomes and takes on this symbolic idea of virginity for Othello and the rest of the characters here. So it becomes as good as her virginity. Then as well, as we said, the ocular proof, proving, it's of all make me to see it, or at least so to prove it. So again, this idea, as we've seen in a previous slide, this idea of the handkerchief being absolutely fundamental, being the fulcrum, really, of the play in its symbolism and its importance to Othello's trajectory. And again, we have this idea of the handkerchief being this fixation for his doubt, for his perception of what is true and what is not. It is the proof. And we can see how this becomes this fixation for Othello, because when Iago again is goading him about Cassio, he says, lie with her, and essentially Iago says, what do you want? He said or dreamt or spoke, walked, slept-walked that he was lying with her, sleeping with her, being in the same bed with her naked, etc., lying on her, whatever. And Othello goes into a full rage, as we can see. Lie with her, lie on her. We say lie on her when they belie her. So essentially, when you say lie on someone, you're saying you're lying about someone, not lying physically on them. Lie with her, that's fulsome. Handkerchief, confessions, handkerchief, to confess and be hanged for his labour. First to be hanged and then to confess. I tremble at it. Nature would not invest herself in such shadowing passion without some instruction. It is not words that shake me thus. Pish, noses, ears, and lips. Is it possible? Confess, handkerchief, O devil. So firstly, this idea of him clearly not being able to see reality because he is completely incoherent verbally, so thus he is incoherent mentally. And we can see that the handkerchief is pulled through here as the proof of the confession. The handkerchief is the confession in his words. To confess and be hanged here. And then, interesting, to be hanged first and then confess. So he can't see reason anymore. He says, I can't even hear Cassio's confession. I am just going to kill him and then hear his confession, find out the truth afterwards. So this complete disruption of his reality and of his former self, who was so calm and staid. And interesting, nature would not invest herself in such shadowing passion without some instruction. So nature would not spend his time in such dark, but think about shadow, obfuscatory language again we have here, in terms of the idea that what's real, nature would not hide herself without telling me what to do, or not involve themselves with such a shadowy business without giving me some way forward. And noses, ears, and lips. That's a kind of swear here as well. There's also this idea of complete breakdown. And this idea again of, when we've looked at previously, I will chop her to messes, I will tear her all to pieces. This idea of breaking down and destroying here. Yeah, I think you had to paint a picture, actually 100%. Literature mirrors society, represents the darkness of medieval Europe. I would say Renaissance Europe, or early modern Europe. How women were suppressed at the time, 100%. Murder, which I thought a sacrifice. I saw the handkerchief. So here we are, justifying his proof here in saying, this a murder. It was a sacrifice. I had to sacrifice her for my reputation because she was going to harm more men, betray more men, as Othello says. I saw the handkerchief. Proof. I saw it. Reimer says here, there's so much to do, so much stress, so much passion and repetition about a handkerchief. Why is this not called the tragedy of the handkerchief? So this really does underline the importance of the handkerchief here, and thus justifies your spending time on it in analysis, because it really does hinge the whole plot. And Ryan says, as the handkerchief, the ocular proof of infidelity, passes from Othello to Desdemona to Emilia to Iago to Cassio to the courtesan Bianca, it links the three couples together to highlight what they have in common. It draws an implicit parallel between the despised, kept woman Bianca and the respectable wives Desdemona and Emilia, revealing the true nature of the married woman's role by erasing the distinctions between them. So essentially, the handkerchief links all of these different characters together and says, well, Bianca's not so far from what you women are doing here. And it underscores the fact that Othello's proprietorial relationship with Desdemona as husband and wife is typical, that it's extraordinary only in the fatal consequences that leads to this, in this particular case, not to its essential character. So as Asadullah says, this idea that this is typical, this proprietorial relationship between ownership, in other words, relationship between Othello and Desdemona is really the same as relationships at the time between husband and wife. But also we can think of, in Othello's eyes, Desdemona becomes the handkerchief only, just something for him to possess, keep clean, and keep to himself. And that's it. Anony, thank you for joining us. It's a great way to learn English because it involves a lot of reading, writing, listening, and speaking. So I would totally say so. A lot of language as well. If you are looking to learn English, feel free to ask any questions you need to in the chat. So then, with appearance versus reality, we also have this idea of what do we see? We have spoken about Desdemona as this beautiful vessel, of her as a kind of paragon of female virtue, of her as this idealized creature in the past. But we also have this idea of corruption that runs through the play and thus contaminates the view of Desdemona as something that is apologies, I have just a screen that's popping up that's slightly strange on my end. Okay. Apologies all. Apologies for that. Had a brief pause. So anyway, so we were saying about filth and dirt. So this idea then of contamination, contaminating this appearance and making it seem like this betrayal, this contamination of something we can see. So firstly, Brabantio, run from her guardage to the sooty bosom of such a thing as thou. We have this idea of contamination here with this sooty bosom, as we've spoken about before, soot as ashes that through contact would pass on and damage something. If we're thinking of Desdemona as a handkerchief, then we're thinking of her as something that can be corrupted. If we're thinking about her as embodiment of virginity, the same. Othello also says, her name that was as fresh as Dian's visage is now begrimed and black as mine own face. So we've spoken about this when we thought about race, for example, but this also works for us, this idea of Desdemona's name, her reputation, her purity, which was as fresh as Aphrodite's face, as white, in other words, is now dirty as mine own face. Notice the internalized racism there, and the color imagery juxtaposing here between appearance and reality, because she's not turned a different color. There's this idea of her reputation changing her appearance here, and her name as well. Othello also, arise, black vengeance from the hollow hell. So we have this idea of, for him, revenge is black and arrives from hell. Again, internalized racism there, so much so, but also what we're seeing here is blackness again. Iago to Emilia says, filth, thou liest. By heaven, I do not, gentlemen. So this idea of Iago in Act 5, Scene 2, calling Emilia filth for lying, which is actually not even lying, because he's angry at her for betraying him. As she seeks to defend Desdemona. It's this idea of dirt associated with wrongdoing. And Othello, she's like a liar gone to burning hell. 'Twas I that killed her. Oh, you, the more angel she, and you the blacker devil. She turned to folly, and she was a whore. Thou dost belie her, and thou art a devil. She was false as water. This idea, liar gone to hell, angel and blacker devil, saying that she was turned to folly, so turned to foolishness, and was a fool. You are the devil. So these ideas of blackness here, and false as water means you're inconstant as water. So as changeable, as fluid as water. So you can't trust her, you can't contain her, type of idea. But then there's also the sort of irony, the dramatic irony of that, because water, of course, is clear. So he's saying he's false as water, but if we interpret that slightly differently, we can think, okay, but he's not again seeing what is clear in front of everyone else, especially Emilia. Oh, yes. He also says, and this is Iago now, saying, I will turn her virtue into pitch, and out of her own goodness make the mesh that shall enmesh them all. So here he is saying that he will turn her virtue, which he implies is white, into pitch, into blackness, darkness, tar. And out of her own goodness will make that. So the things that are good about her, I will use and manipulate them in order to capture everyone. So he's going to play her goodness in